Oh, Captain, my Captain, the infamous poem by Walt Whitman.
You're killing me. Oh, my Una, you are not dead, thankfully.
All right, so my first question is, what exactly is this poem? Like, what's it doing?
I think it's the best use of metaphor ever in a tribute to the greatest arguably the greatest president the United States has ever seen.
Have you heard the term elegy before?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So you've probably, if for those out there have been at a funeral, you've probably heard of eulogy, like where when someone's passed away, you kind of gather and you talk about the good things that they've accomplished, the positive things amongst other things. Well, an elegy is the poetic version of that, right? And it's right there in the title, Oh, Captain, my Captain. Our captain has passed away. You mentioned that this is a tribute to the greatest president, arguably, but does it have to be the president?
No, it doesn't. Obviously, there is a lot of information about why Whitman wrote this, but it could be reused again. And I think it has been in other regards in cinema and throughout history. It could be attributed to any great leader. The captain is the leader of the ship. And you could insert any other great leader's captain's name in there.
So with that said, you and I read a story that it dealt more with naturalism. And we made a joke of if you had to throw one of these men overboard, who would you throw? Well, you'd throw the captain because they don't actually do anything, right? Like you had the guy that was rowing the boat. You had the guy that was chucking water out because they had a hole in the boat and were sinking, right? And there was like a crippled guy that was even then like shooing off the birds. It was something like that. But we made that joke, and I'm trying to like maybe just take it a little bit more seriously of like, what is a captain's role on a ship? Because this is a really strange analogy, but I just realized, like, have you ever been to a food buffet, like where all you can eat buffet?
Oh yeah, Chinese buffet. That's my jam.
Well, I've been to one, and they had like everything, right? And I'm like, ooh, jerk chicken. I love jerk chicken, right? And then over here, they have like the Asian section, like, oh, I love sushi. Like, let me grab a couple of sushi. And then we get to the desserts, and I'm like, ooh, chocolate pudding. Let me get some of that. Like, that's delicious. And I sit down, and I'm like, this is awful. Like, these, like the jerk chicken and the sushi just like don't go together at all. And I realize it's that role of captain, the one that's making a whole bunch of people who might be really good at sushi. This person might be really good at jerk chicken. Like if we're looking at a boat having a bunch of sailors that might be able to do a lot of different tasks, getting all of them to not just be good at a task, but to be good at accomplishing something by working together. To me, that's my best articulation of a captain without sinking to the low-hanging fruit of calling them middle management of not actually doing anything.
And that's the problem, right? And I love your analogy because a lot of times middle management is always going to have a negative connotation, but is it a necessary evil or is it just necessary? And I think that the purpose we have to see in middle management and or a captain is the coordination. They're able to take all these different pieces that don't necessarily fit together well and coordinate them into a functioning group. On the ship, in the country, whatever your analogy is, in the restaurant, you have to take all these pieces. Somebody that is controlling, the rudder, somebody's that controlling the sails, somebody's controlling, the bailing of the water. You take all of these pieces. It takes a very unique individual to have just enough knowledge of what those people do to be able to coordinate it together to make it work not only maybe efficiently, but perfectly. And I think that Whitman's ode to Lincoln or any great leader is saying that you are the one that were able to do this and not anybody could just do this. Our captain could do this.
So I think you said Lincoln a couple times. We do have an international audience, so let's call it out. This was written in 1865. Who is Lincoln and what is happening in 1865?
Yes, I was referencing President Abraham Lincoln. United States fought a civil war from 1861 to 1865, and Lincoln was the president through that time, and Whitman writes this ode to him after he's been assassinated by John Wilkes Booth in 1865.
So the Civil War is going on, which is
The
I
U.S.
know that
fighting the
there's
U.S. Oh, go ahead.
it's countrymen fighting countrymen, right? North versus South. And it's a big deal because you're forcing a worldview, an ideology. You're sticking up for what you believe to be the correct moral stance, and you have half the country wants to secede. Where if you don't do something, this country will no longer be what it was founded to be, right? So could that even happen today? I don't even know if it could. It would just be so strange, I guess, to imagine something like that. But it's also the importance of it. I can't imagine it not happening too, right? Like it was a time in the world where we were looking at what does it mean to be a human? What are the rights a human should have? And slavery, I mean, it happened all over the world, right? Like let's not try to dress it up.
It's not unique
And
to the U.S.
no, and every country was going through this problem of I mean, when they first landed, there was already abolitionists saying this is wrong, right? This is wrong. And it just goes on, and the chattering, and you have people writing, Frederick Douglass and such, that like gave a perspective that people realized we should change this. This isn't correct. So I guess let's start with, you said earlier that this is the greatest metaphor. And I'm kind of curious, do we agree? Maybe we don't, maybe we do. What is the ship in this metaphor?
To me, the ship is the United States itself. The ship is taking on water. It's beaten to hell. And that, for me, was the United States. We'd kind of been beaten down. We're bailing water. People on board are fighting amongst each other of what to do to kind of right the ship, to save the ship. And the captain comes along and kind of not, I mean, in this metaphor, he fixes it all himself. Now, obviously, Lincoln didn't do that, but he's the coordinator, as I said before, of fixing all of these problems that are happening on this ship, that he's the one that's going to get people to where they need to be so that the ship doesn't sink and the country doesn't end, and we continue on with this experiment called America.
Well, it's kind of like, exactly to that point, the captain doesn't really do anything per se on the ship. Maybe he can do a little bit of everything. I think you mentioned that he has to know just enough about everything to be able to coordinate them, right? It's the sailors. It's the ship, the crewmates that are running the ship. And to that exact point, the captain sometimes becomes a figure, becomes almost like representing an idea. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
I guess this is kind of very lowbrow and opposite. So maybe we go up and down the ladder. I've been talking about this recently. Like, I'm sure, have you heard the name Caitlin Clark here recently with the WNBA?
Yeah, she's an okay basketball player. That's sarcasm. That's sarcasm. She is a phenomenal basketball player.
This is, for depending on when you're watching this right now, as we're recording, this is her first season. She's touted as a generational talent, and you see coworkers, you see people that have never once cared or talked about the WNBA watching WNBA scrimmages, practices, just to watch Caitlin Clark. I live in Indiana, and it used to be just the bottom row of the 3 levels of the arena where they play. Now all 3 levels are completely sold out. All of them.
That's
and
cool.
Caitlin Clark, she's a great basketball player, generational talent, but she's also now a figure. She's showing young girls that they can accomplish more than what they've been told. That there's a ceiling that they have not reached yet. And that there's a place the sport can go that they didn't think it could go before, right? It's like that captain, that leader, they become this inspiration for almost everyone around them, right? And that's what I think, Walt Whitman's looking at the death of Abraham Lincoln, assassinated, who believed in something. And you have this thing that was accomplished, the abolition of slavery. That's a beautiful thing. And people should celebrate that. But then it's also like mixed with these emotions of our leader died for it, right? Like there was death to get us here. So it's like that elation on a whole, but on a personal level, it's sadness.
I think one thing that you said there really kind of strikes me of what I took from this poem is the fact that Abraham Lincoln is, like you said, being memorialized, but I feel like it's more than that. He's being created into almost a mythological person, a mythological creature entity. And not to take anything away from Lincoln, I obviously would put him up there, arguably top 3 presidents for the United States as well. But sometimes when we look back at history, and we've talked about this many times, the winners write history, and we look at other figures that have been, memorialized in poems and stories, sometimes there's a nugget of truth in there, but I don't think that takes away from the fact of what, to me, Walt Whitman was trying to do was to pay homage to a person that sacrificed his life for the greatness of this country. And I'm not saying that he went into war and literally, took a bullet like, so many hundreds of thousands of young men did. But in the end, he did die for a cause. And I think that tribute makes him this mythological person and gives a gravitas to what it means to be an American, what it means to sacrifice, what it means to be a leader from the front and not from the back. And that's what Lincoln did. And that's, I think, what Walt Whitman viewed. Even though he never met him, that's what he saw him doing during that time period.
Well, it's like, what was he to Walt Whitman on some level? And what was Abraham Lincoln to any person at the time, too, depending on the person. But you have that moment in the second stanza where he kind of like says, father, like dad, like it's almost like he's conflating. I don't know if in the story, the speaker, the sailor, if it was his actual dad. I didn't take it that way. I took it almost as like, how sometimes you have like a found relationship where you have a person that nurtures you, that teaches you, that coaches you, and they become like a father figure, even though they might not be biologically your father, right? Well, on some level, could and did Abraham Lincoln become that father figure for some through his inspiration, through his, the way that when, he was elected, he took opponents and put them in his cabinet because he wanted debate. He wanted freedom of ideas to challenge each other. And you don't ever see that anymore. But that's why I think he's such an inspiration, is because he encourages everyone to be their best self. And maybe it's not about winning. Maybe it's not about having a cabinet of people behind you always just yes-manning you. Maybe it's about what is right and help challenge me so I can challenge you in return so we can get to the best answer. And I think that's what a fatherly figure does. And I think that's kind of one of the elements of why we see that in this poem.
And Lincoln's also the type of individual that, beyond just the mythological thoughts of him, is the fact that, yeah, he appealed to a lot of people, and he's almost an embodiment of the American dream of being the dark horse candidate, and nobody thought he was going to win, and then coming in, and then was he a great president, or was greatness thrust upon him and he was able to achieve that? There's just so much to how complicated of a person and a politician, a leader, a husband, a father that he was. And that's why this poem, I think, is regarded as one of the greatest American poems ever, because it had such an inspiring figure. It had a person that epitomized Americana, not only in that time period, but through all of history. And again, you can take this poem and not just apply it to Lincoln, but to any other great leader as well, because it's such a well-rounded poem. And it has that, it has an uplifting feel to it, right? It has that sing-song feel. And you just, you just kind of, I was bobbing my foot when I was, kind of reading it and stuff. And then my wife was like, "What are you doing?" I'm like, "Oh, I'm reading Oh Captain, My Captain." She's like, "Oh, I haven't heard that in forever." So then I read it out loud again to her. And it just, we were both kind of just like going along with it because it has that positive vibe to it. It's a nice reminder of goodness in our country.
Yeah. And whether you find that goodness in a great leader, you could find that goodness in your spouse, your children sometimes, that surprise you with amazing leadership and a decision to stay positive in a time when you're getting frustrated and mad at a situation, and you realize how easy it is to forgive and move on and just see the bigger picture, right? And that's what you see in the story, is the sailors and everybody celebrating the bigger picture, even though you might have a personal sadness too, I guess I would say. So whoever that person is for you, I hope you can kind of think of them. Don't feel like you need to think about Abraham Lincoln. This is a story where the metaphor of whatever movement or change, whether you're trying to get through a hard time in your life, like even just recently we had COVID, right? Sometimes we found those little nuggets of happiness or someone that helped drag us along the way just to find a little bit more happiness throughout the day. I hope you guys can find that out there. So thank you for spending some time with us on the Poem Today Walt Whitman playlist down below. My name has been Una. Thank you for spending time with us. Peace.
Una, my captain. Peace.